I would like to invite Rick Johnston, who's Managing Director of International Government Affairs at Citi, and a good friend of many of us in this room, to the stage to introduce our keynote speaker, Undersecretary Gil Kaplan.
This is going to be tough. No coffee. Wow. All right. Well, I understand the Undersecretary is here, so I will commence. Good afternoon. It's my privilege and honor to introduce our keynote speaker, the Undersecretary of Commerce for International Trade, Gil Kaplan. I'd also like to take this opportunity, since I've got the mic, to congratulate and express Citi's appreciation for the fantastic work, really, that the CSI team has performed in creating this summit. Christy Bliss, Chantel Isaac, Era Abbasi, Albert Ting, Shanique Stevenson, you've really taken CSI to the next level. And I know we at Citi very much appreciate that, and I know the rest of the membership does as well, particularly in these dynamic times, as one might say. Gil Kaplan, Undersecretary of Commerce and Trade, is one of the most qualified individuals to fill the role that I've seen in 45 years since I've been working on international trade issues here in Washington. He has a deep experience in trade law, being a senior partner in several leading law firms that practice in the field. And from 1983 to 1988, Gil was at the tip of the spear for the Reagan administration as it grappled with an international trade environment not unlike what we are experiencing today, where trade enforcement needed more attention. The U.S. economy was undergoing severe challenges from a trading partner that seemed to have a competitive edge, but for reasons that often did not conform to the rules then embodied in the GATT. In his role as Deputy Assistant and Acting Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Import Administration, Gil was, among other things, supervising the administration's programs addressing steel, semiconductors, and machine tool trade problems. At that time, he was also actively involved in the negotiation of the WTO agreement that eventually brought the organization into being in 1995. An experience, I'd say, that is clearly going to be very important as WTO reform discussions become far more serious. I think most of us in this room would agree that we belong to a community of dedicated professionals here in Washington that, for most of our careers, have spent our good thoughts and energy in working for a trade and investment regime that is fair and promotes economic growth and development, not only for the U.S., but for the world. It is more than just a job for most of us. It is truly a career with a good purpose, emulated by people we have known and counted as friends, such as Matt Niemeyer, Doug Gowdy, Bob Vastine. Their names, I'm sure, evoke some emotion in most of us when we remember them, which serves as evidence of my point. We are a community working for a better world. And Gil Kaplan is certainly a member of this community. In his confirmation hearing for the Undersecretary post over a year ago, Gil said it best. I've been preparing to hold this position during my entire career. Now, it's a fortunate thing to be able to say, but it's very true. And as most of you know, there's been a heavy emphasis in the Trump administration on attention to trade deficits, particularly measured in trade in goods. But as Citi's CEO, Mike Corbett, recently said, 1% of the U.S. economy today is driven by agriculture, 19% driven by manufacturing, and 80% of our economy is driven by services. Of course, the focus on manufacturing has some justification, but as Christy Bliss, CSI's president, has said in her letter of welcome to the summit, trade and investment in services is at a tipping point. We cannot afford to suppress the need to defend the ability of U.S. services companies, and those of other countries as well, to do business in foreign jurisdictions. We must be aggressive and persistent in working to minimize trade and investment barriers that are erected by governments for purposes that are too often based on political ambition more than sound economic principles. This summit and its agenda is evidence of the great interest we in the private sector have in the role that government plays in our businesses. We have an important opportunity now to hear from one of the leading officers in the U.S. government responsible for trade and investment acts, policies, and practices affecting the services sector. And he is a member of our community. So please join me, if he's out there, in welcoming Undersecretary of Commerce for International Trade, Gil Kaplan.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. We work right across the tunnel, so it's a nice, easy place to get to. So we always like to come to the Reagan Building. Thank you, Rick, for the kind introduction. I'd also like to thank Christine Bliss and her team for all the work they do in the services sector and for the invitation to speak here today. Let me start off by saying that we at the Department of Commerce recognize the tremendous importance of the services sector to our national economy and the global trade ecosystem. We know that much of the U.S. economy is services driven, and this sector represents 82% of U.S. private sector employees, the equivalent of 94 million jobs. The U.S. is both the world's top exporter of services and the world's top importer of services. And services has been an important partner to the production and distribution of manufactured and agricultural products for generations. And as you know, the integration of services and manufacturing is becoming an increasing daily reality. Before I touch on my points of focus today on services, I want to take a moment to address the successful completion of our USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada agreement negotiations, which I know many of you have been keeping close tabs on since discussions to renegotiate NAFTA began last year. Our achievement is a mutually beneficial win for North American service providers, for the digital economy, for the protection of IP, and of course, for farmers, ranchers, U.S. companies, and their workers. In line with the theme for this year's summit, 21st Century Rules-Based Trade, USMCA reflects the administration's key objectives to ensure that modernization of NAFTA represented a 21st century high standard agreement. USMCA includes new chapters covering digital trade, anti-corruption, and good regulatory practices, as well as a chapter devoted to ensuring that small and medium-sized enterprises benefit from the agreement. This agreement will very likely become the template for all our future trade agreements, given the successes we achieved in the negotiation. And as you know, we're already starting some new agreement consideration with the EU and Japan and others. Today, I would like to mainly talk about how we at Commerce, and specifically at the International Trade Administration, plan to enhance the services sector and maximize the global competitiveness of the U.S. economy by looking at, first, how the administration's trade policy is indeed building a new framework of improved, rebalanced trade agreements to grow our economy. Secondly, how our aggressive and forward-leaning strategy for the digital economy is designed to ensure that U.S. companies can fully capture the competitive gains of U.S. leadership in this area. And three, how we are strengthening financial services and supply chain services to reduce costs and improve competitiveness. Right now is a golden opportunity for business, trade, and the economy. There has never been a president more in favor of vigorously enforcing our trade laws to ensure fair and reciprocal trade and a level playing field for all U.S. producers, including in the services sector and for U.S. manufacturers and industrial workers. I'm getting to the point where I can say I've been in Washington a long time in one way or another, and there never has been a president who cares so much about trade, about open markets, and about fairness for U.S. producers in all sectors. I think this is certainly close or the number one priority he thinks about. And I would say that Secretary Ross and certainly Ambassador Lighthizer share that enthusiasm on a very regular basis. And it's truly unique. I've seen some old friends. I worked in the Reagan administration many years ago. President Reagan certainly cared about fairness and trade, but it was not something I think he thought about all that much, and he certainly didn't think about it every day. But this is a totally different president with a great emphasis on trade, on fairness, on manufacturing, and on services. I think this has led to a U.S. economy that is stronger than it has been in more than a decade. It has grown at a rate above predictions, while the unemployment rate has fallen to the lowest level in nearly 50 years. With the new policies under the Trump administration, we hope to sustain this level of growth because a growing economy solves many problems. We at the Department of Commerce are working to help achieve these goals, and at the International Trade Administration, also known as ITA, the agency within commerce that I run, we are committed to this trade vision. To strengthen U.S. industry competitiveness and to ensure fair and reciprocal trade both here and abroad, ITA works seamlessly across its three business units: global markets, industry and analysis, and enforcement and compliance. And we have about 2,300 people in these three units working on these issues. Our work on the digital economy is housed mainly under our industry and analysis business unit at ITA, touching on cross-border data flows, the EU, US, and Swiss US Privacy Shield frameworks, the EU General Data Protection Regulation, APEC cross-border privacy rules systems, the Domestic Privacy Initiative, and the provision of digital trade provisions of trade agreements. Getting our approach right depends on key policies that governments need to embrace. Cross-border data flow, for example, underpins the digital economy, allowing innovative companies of all sizes to reach new markets near and far. Through growth in services, the digital economy supported 5.9 million jobs, or 3.9% of total U.S. employment. The Department of Commerce has begun a national conversation on a forward-thinking approach to consumer data privacy designed to provide high levels of protection for individuals while giving organizations legal clarity and the flexibility to innovate. This domestic approach is meant to build off our strong privacy enforcement practices and provide a risk-based approach to minimize risk to users' privacy in order to foster greater confidence and trust in products and services. While this approach may be branded as a domestic initiative, I find it important to highlight the role played by the International Trade Administration, ITA. From the beginning, ITA has been central to making sure that any domestic framework is also consistent with other privacy practices around the world. Expanding the scope of services trade across borders requires an enabling environment. As the lead agency responsible for developing and overseeing the Privacy Shield framework and the APEC CBPRs, ITA recognizes the need for mechanisms that promote interoperability of privacy framework to ensure that data can flow across borders while strengthening cross-border cooperation among enforcement authorities. As many of you know, the Privacy Shield discussions with Europe are going on this week. I think the main day is tomorrow. It's probably over for today, but we'll hear about that by the end of the week. Also, let me briefly discuss financial services and supply chain services, both of which are essential to improving competitiveness. We work closely with many CSI members to identify and find ways to effectively address financial services market access concerns around the world. Market access barriers that my team is currently addressing impacting financial services include requirements to store data locally, limits on foreign direct investment, discriminatory policies that favor domestic companies over U.S. companies, and postal monopolies competing against U.S. financial service companies. For example, India is a great potential market for U.S. financial service firms, but there are serious issues that impact the ability of U.S. firms to compete effectively. In early September, I traveled to New Delhi and Bombay to raise concerns about data localization requirements and efforts to nationalize credit reporting agencies. Data localization efforts, as you know, are a spreading problem. I also discussed this point with Prime Minister Phuc in Vietnam. Finally, concerning supply chains, we recognize that they are a lifeblood of a competitive economy and the vital link in the services manufacturing ecosystem that is the foundation of our 21st century economy. They are also critical elements of our national security infrastructure. As evidenced by the explosive growth of e-commerce supply chains, they are among the most powerful drivers of innovation and growth throughout our economy. During my recent trip to Asia, I spoke with several large providers of e-commerce, who might be in this room, who discussed how they are setting up sale and distribution chains for small and medium enterprises throughout Asia, and in fact throughout the world. Given ITA's concerns about assisting and growing SMEs, it was very exciting to hear about these developments. These e-commerce channels could become a very powerful export distribution channel, allowing SMEs to enter the world market much more quickly and much less expensively than ever before. We are engaging with our stakeholders in the supply chain industry to identify and resolve competitive pain points to reduce trade barriers and regulatory hurdles. As you all know, here again, data localization is a large and increasing area of concern. In closing, I'd like to share a few insights about another subject, one that I know concerns many of you, current U.S.-China trade relations. I know many of you are concerned with tariffs on goods from China. I want to emphasize that these tariffs were imposed only after thorough review by the administration. They are needed to address China's forced technology transfers, unfair licensing, theft of IP, and computer hacking. We regret that China took retaliatory steps which they employed with no review or sound legal basis. We want the Chinese to stop the dangerous, unfair trade practices that are endangering not only our economy, but the world's future trade landscape. We will not continue to stand by and watch as our companies, workers, and industries are swamped by unfairly subsidized imports and closed markets. And we will not allow foreign countries to determine the standards under which goods have to be manufactured and entered into international trade. And we certainly will not allow countries to require technology transfer in order to sell in their markets, and we will not allow them to steal our IP. We need support, vocal and clear support from American industries like yours as we continue to promote a freer and fairer international economy. My time says 0, so it's just perfect. I am grateful today for your time and the opportunity to share my message with you. Thank you.